My violent father forced me to spy and snitch on my mother so he could punish her, threatening to discipline me if I didn't obey. I finally broke down and called CPS, but he lied to cover himself, and now he knows I wanted to have him locked up. I'm terrified and have no idea what he might do next. I still remember the day my childhood died, replaced by a chilling fear that gripped my tiny heart. I was just 5, and I'd burst into tears over a burnt grilled cheese, a perfectly normal kid reaction. But then I heard my dad's heavy footsteps thudding down the stairs, and a flash of pure terror contorted my mom's face. She lunged, clamping a hand over my mouth to stifle my cries, which, of course, only made me panic even more. "Son, go to your room." My dad's voice was a sheet of ice, sharp and unfeeling. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the yelling began. "I'm married to you, and you can't even cook our son an effing meal?" My blood ran cold. Then, a sickening thud. It sounded like my mom had collapsed. I instinctively flung the door open. There she was, curled on the marble floor, the area around her eye already swelling grotesquely. I dropped to my knees, desperate to hug and comfort her, but my dad's voice sliced through the air again. "Son, no need to comfort this weak woman. She got what she deserved." I tried to block him out, to keep holding her, but he started threatening me too. That's when I stopped. From that day on, my dad twisted me into his little informant. Every dust bunny, every late pickup by my mom, he told me to report it. He said it was to help her be better, the best thing for the family. But when I inevitably missed something or held back, he'd start hitting me. Most of my childhood was spent as his surveillance camera. Sometimes, I tried to tell my mom I'd keep her secrets, but she'd get this fierce, angry look in her eyes. "No, do what your father tells you," she'd snap, her voice hard. So, for years, I just assumed this was normal. That abuse was just part of life. Then, one afternoon, everything shattered. I was at my friend Hugo's house, the first friend I'd made whose parents were actually still together, and I felt like he truly understood me. We were eating in the kitchen, and his mom had made us hamburgers. I bit into mine and, out of pure instinct, blurted, "This is burnt." I braced myself. I expected his dad to explode, to throw his mom across the room, at the very least to slap her. Instead, his dad just chuckled. "She's always doing that," he said, like it was a joke. Hugo nodded, and his mom just smiled, burying her face in her hands playfully. I was so tense, waiting for the bomb to drop. But it never came. When I left, both his parents kissed me goodbye. My head was spinning as I walked home. It felt like I'd just stepped out of a dream. When I walked through our front door, it was like entering a different world entirely. My mom was huddled on the cold marble floor, her forehead bruised and red, sobbing. I could hear my dad snoring upstairs. I went to her. She tried to push me away, to hide, but I told her to shut up while I gently treated her wounds. "I'm sorry for not being there for you, Mom," I whispered. "I love you." She didn't say a word, just squeezed my arms incredibly tight and nodded through her tears. The next day, I was done. I woke up with a quiet fury, ready to betray my parents in the worst way possible. As soon as school let out, I didn't go home. I went straight to the police station. I didn't know how any of it worked, so I just blurted out everything. The violence, the manipulation, the emotional abuse. The woman behind the desk looked so concerned. She promised to get a social worker for an emergency home visit. After an hour of agonizing waiting, the social worker arrived at the station. She told me she'd come to my house that evening, and my heart leaped, that she'd help with emergency rehousing for me and my mom right after the visit. I was so grateful, I actually hugged her. I walked home with a genuine smile on my face. And just like she promised, at 9 p.m., there was a knock on the door. My mom, expecting a family member, opened it. The social worker was immediately faced with a woman covered in bruises, a black eye staring back at her. I watched from the corner of the living room as my mom's face went ghost white. She immediately called my dad. I don't know what he said, but in just minutes, the social worker was apologizing for bothering us and leaving. I knew my dad had tricked her. I tried to bolt to my room, but it was too late. My dad heard my footsteps. He grabbed me. "If you think what I did to your mother was bad," he snarled, "you should see how my dad taught me to treat snitches." I won't go into the details of what happened next. I just remember waking up on my bedroom floor the next morning, every inch of me screaming in pain. My mom had cleaned me up while I was passed out. She sat on the edge of my bed, her eyes utterly empty. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but you need to understand. We can't ever tell anyone again." My dad had convinced the social worker that her injuries were from a car accident, and that I was a troubled kid who made up stories for attention. School that day was a blur. I could barely sit at my desk without wincing. My teacher, Mrs. Kayla, noticed and asked if I was okay. I just nodded and mumbled, fell off my bike. The lie came so easily. I'd been telling them for years. After school, I didn't go to Jacob's house anymore, even though he invited me. I was too scared my dad would find out. That night at dinner, my dad acted like nothing happened. He talked about his day, asked about my homework, completely normal. But then, he looked at me, a smile that made my stomach churn playing on his lips. "Son," he said, "I think we need a new system around here. Your mother clearly needs more help than I thought." He explained that from now on, I needed to report every single thing my mom did wrong. If I missed anything, we'd both be punished. The next few weeks were a living nightmare. I became his little spy camera, watching my mom's every move. If she took too long at the grocery store, I had to tell him. If dinner wasn't ready exactly at 6 o'clock, I had to tell him. If she spent too much time on the phone with her sister, I had to tell him. And the worst part? My mom started watching me too. She'd remind me to tell my dad things, terrified that if I didn't, we'd both get hurt. One day at school, I just broke down in the bathroom. I couldn't stop crying. A kid named Hugo, who had transferred in a month ago, found me there. He didn't ask questions. He just sat with me until I calmed down. After that, we started hanging out at lunch. He talked about video games and movies, normal kid stuff that actually made me forget about home for a little while. One day, when my sleeve rode up during lunch, Hugo noticed the bruises on my arms. I quickly pulled it down, but he'd already seen. He didn't say anything right away, but the next day, he brought me an extra sandwich his mom had packed. The day after that, he gave me a cool rock he'd found. Small things, but they meant everything to me. About a month after meeting Hugo, I finally told him a little bit about what was happening at home. Not everything, just that my dad got angry sometimes. Hugo didn't freak out like I expected. He just listened, then told me his cousin had been in a similar situation and got help. That was the very first time I felt like maybe there was a way out. I started spending more time with Hugo at school, finding excuses to stay late for study groups that didn't exist. My dad was suspicious at first, but when my grades actually improved, he eased up a little. Those brief moments of freedom kept me going. Hugo became my lifeline, the only person who knew even a fraction of what was happening. But I knew I was walking a dangerous line. My dad had eyes everywhere. He'd randomly show up at school to surprise me, checking who I was talking to. He'd question me about every single minute of my day, and at home, the surveillance continued. My mom and I were trapped in this sick game, both trying to protect each other while knowing we couldn't. One day after school, Hugo asked if I wanted to come over to his house. I froze. I hadn't been to anyone's house since Jacob's, and that experience had changed everything. I made up some lame excuse about needing to help my mom with something. Hugo looked disappointed but didn't push it. His eyes lingered on me for a moment, as if trying to figure out what I wasn't saying, before he shrugged and walked away. When I got home, my dad was waiting by the door. "You're 7 minutes late," he said, checking his watch. My stomach dropped like a stone. I explained about a teacher keeping us after class, which, for once, was actually true. He stared at me for what felt like forever, his cold eyes dissecting my expression, before nodding. "Go tell your mother dinner better be ready in 20 minutes. His voice was calm, which somehow made it worse. I found my mom frantically chopping vegetables in the kitchen. Her hands were shaking, making the knife slip dangerously close to her fingers with each cut. I whispered that Dad wanted dinner in 20 minutes. She just nodded, not looking up. I noticed a fresh bruise on her wrist, purple and yellow against her pale skin, but didn't say anything. What was the point? Instead, I started setting the table, trying to help without being obvious about it. The clink of each plate against the table felt deafening in the silent kitchen. That night, I lay in bed, thinking about Hugo's invitation. A tiny part of me desperately wanted to go, to see what a normal house looked like again, to sit in a living room without measuring every word, every movement. But a bigger part was absolutely terrified of what would happen if my dad found out. He'd made it crystal clear after the social worker incident that any attempt to reach out for help would end badly for both me and my mom. I still had the scars to prove it. The next morning at breakfast, my dad announced he'd be home early. "I want to hear about your day, son. Every detail." The way he said it made my skin crawl, like insects were marching up my spine. I nodded, keeping my eyes on my cereal, watching the flakes slowly turn soggy in the milk. My mom accidentally dropped a spoon, and we both flinched at the sharp clatter. My dad just smiled, taking a slow sip of his coffee. School that day was a blur. Hugo kept talking about some new video game, his hands animated as he described the graphics and gameplay, but I couldn't focus. All I could think about was what would happen when I got home. During lunch, Hugo finally noticed something was wrong. "Dude, you okay? You haven't said like 2 words all day." He pushed his chocolate milk toward me, a peace offering. I shrugged and mumbled something about being tired. Hugo didn't buy it. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Is it your dad again?" I quickly looked around to make sure no one heard him. The cafeteria was noisy with kids shouting and laughing, but still, you never knew who might be listening. Just drop it, okay? I snapped, harsher than I intended. Hugo looked hurt, his shoulders slumping, and I immediately felt bad. He was the only friend I had. Sorry, I muttered. Just not a good day. I picked up my sandwich, unable to stomach even a bite. After school, I rushed home, making sure to be exactly on time. My dad was sitting in the living room, waiting. He patted the couch next to him, the leather creaking under his hand. Tell me about your day, son. I recited my classes, what we learned, what homework I had, normal stuff. Then he asked who I talked to. I mentioned a few kids from class, carefully avoiding Hugo's name. Something told me to keep Hugo a secret. To have one thing that was just mine, one friendship he couldn't control or destroy. Any new friends? He pressed, his eyes never leaving my face. My heart started racing, pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Not really, I said, trying to sound casual. Just the usual kids. I picked at a loose thread on my jeans, trying to appear bored rather than terrified. He nodded slowly, but I could tell he didn't believe me. Your mother tells me you've been mentioning someone named Hugo. My blood went cold. I'd forgotten that I'd told my mom about Hugo a few weeks ago, during one of those rare moments when my dad wasn't around. She must have reported it to him. Like she was supposed to. Like we were both supposed to report everything. Oh yeah, I said quickly. He's new. We worked on a project together. I tried to make it sound unimportant. Just another kid in class, not the only person who seemed to notice something was wrong. My dad leaned back, studying my face. Invite him over sometime. I'd like to meet your friends. His smile didn't reach his eyes, which remained calculating and cold. The thought of Hugo coming to our house terrified me. He's really busy with sports and stuff. I lied. Maybe sometime though. I held my breath, hoping he would drop it. The subject dropped, but I knew it wasn't over. My dad never forgot anything. His memory was like a steel trap, catching every mistake, every lie, every secret. That weekend, I was cleaning the garage as punishment for not reporting that my mom had spent 10 extra minutes on the phone with her sister. My arms ached from moving boxes, and dust coated my throat. My dad came out with 2 beers and handed one to me. I was 12. I'd never had alcohol before. The bottle was cold and unfamiliar in my hand. Drink, he said. It wasn't a request. His tone left no room for refusal. I took a sip and nearly gagged. It tasted awful, bitter and sour at the same time. He laughed, the sound echoing in the garage. Your grandfather gave me my first beer when I was your age, he said, taking a long drink from his bottle. Told me it would put hair on my chest, make me a man. He looked at me with those cold eyes. You want to be a man, don't you? I nodded and forced myself to take another sip. My dad smiled, seemingly satisfied. Men take care of their families, he continued. They make sure everyone follows the rules. That's what I'm teaching you. He placed his heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing until it hurt. I just kept nodding, feeling sick from the beer and his words. He went on about how my mom needed a firm hand, how women were naturally disorganized and emotional, how lucky she was to have him, how lucky I was to have him as a father teaching me these important lessons. I stared at the concrete floor, watching a spider scurry into a crack, wishing I could disappear as easily. By Monday, I was a mess. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The beer had made me sick, but the fear was worse. Hugo noticed right away, his eyebrows drawing together in concern. During gym class, he saw the bruises on my back when I changed shirts, dark purple marks where my dad had pushed me against the wall. This time, he didn't stay quiet. Dude, what the hell happened to you? He whispered, his eyes wide with shock. I quickly pulled my shirt down, fabric catching on my still tender skin. Fell down the stairs, I muttered. The same excuse I'd been using for years. The words felt hollow. Rehearsed. Hugo shook his head. That's not from falling downstairs. My cousin used to say the same thing, but it was her stepdad hitting her. His voice was low but intense, his eyes darting around to make sure no one else was listening. I felt panic rising in my chest, constricting my breathing. Just drop it, okay? It's not like that. I slammed my locker shut, the metal clang making us both jump, but Hugo wouldn't let it go. After school, he followed me partway home, talking the whole time about how his cousin finally told someone and got help. How things got better for her. How they could get better for me too. The autumn leaves crunched under our feet as we walked, the sound punctuating his words. You don't understand? I finally snapped. They already tried to help. It made everything worse. I told him about the social worker, how my dad had manipulated her, how badly I'd been punished afterward. The words tumbled out, a dam breaking after years of silence. Hugo looked shocked, but determined. His jaw set in a way I hadn't seen before. Then we need better evidence. My mom works at the hospital. She deals with this kind of stuff all the time. She knows what to look for. The thought of another adult knowing terrified me. No, you can't tell anyone. Promise me, Hugo. I grabbed his arm, my fingers digging into his jacket. He reluctantly promised, but I could tell he was still thinking about it. We parted ways at the corner, and I hurried home, checking the time obsessively to make sure I wasn't late. The clouds overhead matched my mood, gray and threatening. That night, my dad was in a weird mood, almost cheerful. He brought home pizza, which never happened. The greasy box sat in the center of our table like an alien object. My mom and I exchanged confused glances across the table. Then he dropped the bomb. I ran into the father of your friend Hugo today, he said casually, watching my reaction. Nice guy? Works at the bank. We're having them over for dinner this weekend. He took a bite of pizza, cheese stretching between his mouth and the slice. I nearly choked on my pizza. What? How did you, small town son? People know people. He smiled. That smile that never reached his eyes. I thought it would be nice for you to have friends over, like normal families do. His emphasis on normal made my stomach churn. The message was clear. He was reminding me that he controlled everything, even my friendships. And now he was going to get close to Hugo's family, probably to make sure Hugo couldn't help me. I pushed my plate away, appetite gone. The next day at school, I frantically told Hugo about the dinner. You can't come. I insisted. Tell your parents you're sick or something. My words came out in a desperate rush. Hugo looked confused, his forehead creasing. Why? Maybe this is good. My parents can see what's happening. I shook my head, frustration building. You don't get it. My dad is really good at seeming normal to other adults. He'll charm your parents. And then if you ever try to tell them about me, they won't believe you. I'd seen it happen before, watched adults fall under his spell. But it was too late. Hugo's parents had already accepted the invitation. They were excited to meet my family. Hugo promised he'd try to get his mom alone to show her my bruises, but I knew it wouldn't work. My dad never left me alone with other adults. He was too careful, too controlling. The dinner was a nightmare dressed up as a normal family gathering. My dad was charming, funny, the perfect host. He told jokes that made Hugo's parents laugh, served drinks with a flourish. My mom wore long sleeves to cover her bruises and smiled so much her face must have hurt. I sat next to Hugo, barely speaking, watching my dad win over his parents. The food stuck in my throat. Each bite required effort to swallow. Hugo's dad, Mr. Campbell, worked at the local bank. His mom, Mrs. Campbell, was a nurse at the hospital, just like Hugo had said. They were nice, normal people who had no idea they were sitting at a table with a monster. They complimented our house, thanked my mom for the meal, and treated my dad with the respect he demanded from everyone. At one point, Hugo tried to steer the conversation toward child abuse cases Mrs. Campbell had seen at work. My dad smoothly changed the subject, then gave me a look that made my blood run cold. He knew exactly what Hugo was trying to do. I kicked Hugo under the table, silently begging him to stop. After dinner, while our parents had coffee in the living room, Hugo and I went to my room. Your dad seems nice, Hugo whispered, looking confused. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. I hissed. That's how he fools everyone. Just drop it, okay? You're making things worse. I paced the small space between my bed and desk, unable to sit still. Hugo looked hurt, his shoulders slumping. I'm just trying to help. Well, don't. I was scared, and taking it out on him. Deep down, I knew he was just trying to be a good friend. But all I could think about was what would happen after his family left. The punishment that would surely come. When the Campbells finally went home, my dad closed the door behind them and turned to me with that same smile. Nice family, he said. Though Hugo seems to have quite an imagination. His father mentioned he's been telling some concerning stories at home. His voice was light, but his eyes were hard as flint. My stomach dropped. Somehow, my dad had already poisoned the well. He'd made Hugo seem unreliable to his own parents. I should have known he would be 3 steps ahead. Go to your room, he told me. Your mother and I need to talk. His tone left no room for argument. I went upstairs, but sat at the top of the stairs, listening. I heard my dad telling my mom that Hugo was a bad influence, that I wasn't to see him anymore, that if she allowed it, there would be consequences. My mom just agreed with everything he said, her voice small and defeated. I heard the clink of ice in his glass, the creak of his favorite chair as he settled in for the evening. The next day at school, Hugo was waiting for me by my locker. My parents think you're making stuff up, he said, looking frustrated. My dad said your dad told him you've had problems with lying before. Is that true? His eyes searched mine, looking for answers. I felt sick, betrayal burning in my throat. No, I mean yes. That's what they tell people when I try to get help. See, I told you it wouldn't work. I slammed my locker shut, the sound echoing in the hallway. Hugo looked conflicted, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. My mom's a nurse. She'd recognize abuse if she saw it. Not if she never sees it, I said bitterly. My dad's too smart for that. I turned away, unable to look at the pity in his eyes. Over the next few weeks, my dad systematically destroyed my friendship with Hugo. He told the school counselor that Hugo was a bad influence, requesting we be placed in separate classes. He befriended Hugo's parents, feeding them stories about my behavioral issues and tendency to make up stories for attention. He even suggested I might need therapy. Each move was calculated, designed to isolate me completely. The final blow came when Hugo's parents found some of my texts on his phone where I was describing what my dad did to us. Instead of believing it, they thought I was a troubled kid dragging their son into my problems. They banned Hugo from hanging out with me. The one lifeline I had was severed with surgical precision. At school, Hugo tried to stay friends, but it was hard. We couldn't hang out after school, couldn't text without his parents checking his phone. Eventually, he started hanging out with other kids, giving me sad looks across the cafeteria. I'd watch him laugh with other friends, feeling like I was looking through a window at a life I couldn't have. I was alone again, and my dad knew it. He'd won. His victory was evident in the way he relaxed at home, less vigilant now that my potential ally had been neutralized. My mom grew more withdrawn than ever. She moved through the house like a ghost, doing everything perfectly to avoid punishment. Sometimes I caught her staring at me with this heartbroken look, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Other times, she seemed almost angry with me, like I'd made things worse by trying to get help. The weight of her silent blame was almost as heavy as my dad's punishments. One night, I overheard my dad talking to her in their bedroom. "The boy's turning out just like you," he said, his voice dripping with disgust. "Weak, pathetic, can't even keep his mouth shut." The words slithered under the door, poisonous and sharp. My mom didn't respond, but I heard something hit the wall. A thud, followed by silence. I ran to my room before he could catch me listening, my heart pounding in my ears. The next morning, my mom had a fresh bruise on her cheek, a vivid purple stain spreading across her pale skin. My dad told me it was because I'd been slacking on my reporting duties. "Your mother needs structure," he said, buttering his toast with precise movements. "When you fail to help me provide that, she suffers. Is that what you want?" I shook my head, hating him, hating myself for not being able to stop him. That's when I decided I needed a new plan. If adults wouldn't help me, I'd have to help myself. I couldn't keep living like this, watching my mom fade away, feeling myself disappear a little more each day. I started keeping a journal, hiding it under a loose floorboard in my closet. I wrote down everything: dates, times, descriptions of what my dad did to us. I knew it probably wouldn't help, but it made me feel like I was doing something, like someday someone might read it and understand. The pen scratching against paper became my small act of rebellion, a way to preserve the truth he tried so hard to erase. For weeks, I documented everything. The time he threw a plate at my mom because dinner was cold, ceramic shards scattering across the kitchen floor. The time he locked me in the basement for forgetting to report that she'd spent too long on the phone, leaving me in the dark for hours. The time he made me watch while he hit her, telling me, "This is what happens to women who don't respect their husbands." Each entry was a piece of evidence, a small stone in what I hoped would eventually become a wall of truth. But I got careless one day. I left the journal out when I went to the bathroom. When I came back, my dad was sitting on my bed, reading it. My heart stopped, the world freezing around me. "Interesting stories," he said, flipping through the pages. "Quite the imagination you have." His voice was calm, almost amused. I stood frozen in the doorway as he slowly tore the journal to pieces. "Did you really think this would help?" he asked, letting the scraps fall to the floor like confetti. "Who would believe you over me? I'm a respected businessman. You're just a kid with a history of making things up." He stood up and walked toward me. I backed away until I hit the wall, the doorknob digging into my back. "Clean this up," he said, gesturing to the torn pages. "And if I ever find anything like this again, what happens to your mother will be your fault. Understand?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. After he left, I gathered the torn pages, my hands shaking. All that work, all that evidence, gone. I felt more hopeless than ever, kneeling among the fragments of my failed attempt at justice. But something inside me refused to give up. If a written journal was too risky, I needed something else. Something he couldn't find and destroy. Something that would make adults believe me. The next day at school, I approached Hugo during lunch. We hadn't really talked in weeks. "I need to borrow your phone," I whispered. "Just for a day, please." I held my breath, waiting for him to tell me to get lost. Hugo looked surprised but nodded. "My parents got me a new one. You can have my old one. They don't check it anymore." He slipped it to me under the table, the device warm from being in his pocket. "The charger's in my locker. I'll get it to you after class." That night, I hid the phone in a vent in my room, carefully replacing the cover so it looked untouched. I waited until my parents were asleep, then took pictures of my mom's bruises while she was sleeping. I recorded my dad's rants through the wall when he thought no one could hear. I documented everything, my finger trembling as I pressed the shutter button, capturing images I knew could change everything. My surveillance system became more sophisticated over the next 2 weeks. I discovered the phone had a motion-activated recording feature, so I positioned it strategically whenever my dad was likely to explode. I hid it behind books on shelves, inside empty cereal boxes in the kitchen, even taped under the dining table. Each night, I'd retrieve it and review what I'd captured, saving the most damning evidence to a password-protected folder. I recorded him threatening my mom when she spent an extra $10 at the grocery store, his voice eerily calm as he described exactly how he would hurt her. I captured video of him forcing me to recite my mom's mistakes while she stood trembling in the corner. Most chillingly, I recorded him explaining his surveillance system to me. How a real man keeps his family in line by knowing everything they do. For 2 weeks, I collected evidence. I was careful, making sure my dad never suspected anything. I even pretended to be more compliant, reporting my mom's mistakes without being asked, earning his approval. It made me sick, but I knew I needed him to trust me. Each good son act was a cover for my secret rebellion. Then, disaster struck again. My dad noticed Hugo and me talking at school during a parent-teacher conference. He didn't say anything that night, but the next day, he went to Hugo's parents and told them Hugo had stolen money from our house during the dinner. It was a complete lie, but Hugo's parents believed my dad over their own son. His trustworthy facade had worked its magic again. Hugo was grounded, his phone privileges revoked. Our tenuous connection was severed completely. At school, he wouldn't even look at me anymore. His parents had forbidden any contact. I watched him walk past me in the hallway, eyes fixed straight ahead, and felt another piece of hope die. I was devastated, but I still had the phone with all the evidence. I just needed to figure out who to give it to. The social worker who had come before had been easily manipulated. The police might not believe a kid over an adult. I needed someone who would take me seriously, someone my dad couldn't charm or intimidate. Then I remembered Mrs. Kayla, my teacher from earlier that year. She had always been kind, always noticed when something was wrong. She had once asked about a bruise on my arm, and though I'd lied, I remembered the genuine concern in her eyes. Maybe she would help. I approached her after class one day. "Mrs. Kayla, can I talk to you about something important?" My voice was shaking. My hands clenched at my sides to stop their trembling. She looked concerned and nodded. "Of course, sweetheart. What's going on?" She cleared a space at her desk, inviting me to sit. I took a deep breath and showed her some of the pictures on the phone. Her face went pale, her hand covering her mouth. "How long has this been happening?" she asked quietly. "As long as I can remember," I admitted. I tried to get help before, but my dad convinced everyone I was lying. The words came easier now, with evidence to back them up. Mrs. Kayla looked determined, her initial shock hardening into resolve. "Not this time," she said. "This is clear evidence, but we need to be careful. Your father can't know you came to me." She reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. She explained that she was a mandated reporter, which meant she had to report suspected abuse, but she promised to make sure it was handled differently this time. She would contact the original social worker, show her the evidence, and make sure multiple people were involved so my dad couldn't manipulate just one person. She outlined the plan carefully, making sure I understood each step. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Mrs. Kayla kept the phone for safekeeping and told me to act completely normal at home. "Don't give your father any reason to suspect anything," she warned. "We'll move quickly, but carefully." That week was the longest of my life. I went home each day, played my role, reported my mom's mistakes, and pretended everything was normal. My dad seemed pleased with my compliance, even letting me watch TV after dinner one night, a rare privilege. I sat beside him on the couch, every muscle tense, counting the hours until Friday. Then on Friday, Mrs. Kayla pulled me aside after class. "It's happening tonight," she whispered. "The social worker is coming with a police officer and a child advocate. They'll be there at 7 o'clock. Just stay calm and tell the truth." I nodded, my heart racing with fear and hope. This was our last chance. If it didn't work this time, I didn't know what would happen to us. But for the first time, I dared to imagine a different life. One where my mom and I could breathe freely, where we didn't have to measure every word, every step, where we could be safe. I went home that Friday with my stomach in knots. Every step toward my house felt like walking toward a cliff edge. I kept checking the time on the school clock, calculating how many hours until 7 p.m. The weight of what was about to happen made it hard to breathe normally. My dad was in a good mood when I got home, which somehow made everything worse. He was whistling in the kitchen, making himself a sandwich. My mom was folding laundry, her movements mechanical, her eyes fixed on the clothes like they held some secret code. I noticed fresh bruises on her wrists, peeking out from under her sleeves when she reached for another shirt. "Hey, sport," my dad called out, his voice cheerful. "How was school?" He took a bite of his sandwich, mayo catching in the corner of his mouth. "Fine," I mumbled, dropping my backpack by the stairs. I tried to act normal, but my heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Just normal stuff." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. "Your mom's making pot roast tonight, your favorite." He winked at me, like we shared some special secret, like we were just a normal father and son. I forced a smile and headed upstairs to my room, counting each step. 7 hours until the social worker would arrive. 7 hours of pretending everything was fine. I sat at my desk and pulled out homework, staring at math problems I couldn't focus on. The numbers swam before my eyes, meaningless symbols on a page. Around 6:30, I heard my dad's phone ring. He answered it in the living room, his voice drifting up the stairs. Something about work, a problem he needed to handle. I held my breath, hardly daring to hope. Then I heard the magic words, "Fine, I'll come in, but I won't stay long." His footsteps stomped toward the front door. "I'll be back in an hour. Dinner better be ready." The door slammed, and seconds later, his car engine roared to life in the driveway. I ran to the window, watching his taillights disappear down the street. I couldn't believe our luck. Mrs. Kayla must have arranged this somehow, getting him out of the house before the social worker arrived. I raced downstairs to find my mom. She was in the kitchen, checking the pot roast in the oven. "Mom," I said, my voice urgent. "Someone's coming to help us." At 7 o'clock, a social worker and police. Her face went white. The oven mitt slipped from her hand, falling to the floor with a soft thud. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. You know what happened last time. You know what he'll do to us." I grabbed her hands, forcing her to look at me. "It's different this time. I have proof. Real proof he can't talk his way out of." I explained about the phone, the pictures, the recordings. Her eyes widened with each word. "He'll kill us," she whispered. But I could see something else fighting through the fear. A tiny spark of hope. Fragile, but real. "No, he won't," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Not this time." At exactly 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. My mom froze, her hands gripping the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. I took a deep breath and went to answer it. Standing on our porch was the same social worker from before, Miss Deborah. But this time, she wasn't alone. A police officer stood beside her, along with another woman who introduced herself as Salem, a child advocate. Behind them, parked across the street, I spotted Mrs. Kayla in her car, watching. She gave me a small nod of encouragement. "Hello again," Miss Deborah said, her expression serious. "May we come in?" I nodded and stepped back, letting them enter. My mom appeared in the hallway, trembling visibly. The social worker's eyes immediately went to the bruises on her wrists, now fully exposed. "Mrs. Johnson," she said gently, "we need to talk." The next hour was intense. We sat in the living room while I showed them the pictures and played the recordings. My mom cried silently, tears streaming down her face as the evidence of our nightmare was laid bare. The police officer, Officer Drew, took notes and asked questions in a calm, steady voice. Salem sat next to me on the couch, occasionally placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Why didn't you tell me the truth last time?" Miss Deborah asked my mom, her voice gentle but firm. My mom stared at her hands. "He said he'd take my son away. Said no one would believe me anyway." Her voice was barely audible. "And he was right. You didn't." Miss Deborah looked genuinely remorseful. "I made a mistake," she admitted. "But we're here now, and we're not leaving until you're both safe." Just as Officer Drew was explaining what would happen next, we heard it. The sound of tires on the driveway, a car door slamming. My dad was back early. My blood turned to ice. "He's home," I whispered, panic rising in my throat. Officer Drew immediately stood up, positioning himself between us and the door. "Stay calm," he instructed. "Let me handle this." The front door swung open, and my dad stepped in. He froze at the sight of strangers in his living room. For a split second, confusion crossed his face. Then his eyes landed on me, and I watched the realization dawn. His expression hardened into something terrifying. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice deceptively calm. He looked at my mom. "What did you do?" Before she could answer, Officer Drew stepped forward. "Sir, I'm Officer Drew with the county police. We're here investigating reports of domestic abuse." My dad's face transformed instantly, the rage replaced by a look of concerned confusion. It was the same act I'd seen 100 times. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice smooth and reasonable. "My son has a history of making up stories for attention. His therapist. I don't have a therapist." I interrupted, my voice shaking but determined. "That's just another lie." My dad's eyes flashed with anger before he controlled his expression again. "See what I mean? The boy needs help. Officer Drew remained unmoved. Sir, we have photographic evidence and audio recordings that suggest otherwise. For the first time, I saw genuine fear flicker across my dad's face. He hadn't expected this. He was used to being believed, to charming his way out of trouble, but pictures didn't lie. Recordings couldn't be manipulated with a smile and a reasonable explanation. I want to see this so-called evidence, he demanded, taking a step forward. Officer Drew held up a hand. Sir, I need you to stay where you are. My dad ignored him, moving toward me with purpose. What did you do? He hissed, his mask slipping. What did you tell them? Officer Drew moved quickly, positioning himself between us. Sir, step back now. Instead, my dad lunged forward, reaching for me. You ungrateful little. He never finished the sentence. Officer Drew restrained him firmly but professionally. My dad struggled, his face contorted with rage. This is ridiculous. I'm a respected member of this community. You can't. Ronald Johnson, you're under arrest for domestic assault and child endangerment, Officer Drew recited, securing handcuffs around my dad's wrists. You have the right to remain silent. As they led my dad out, he kept yelling about how we'd regret this, how no one would believe us, how he'd be back. But his threats sounded hollow now, powerless in the face of the evidence we had. Once he was gone, the house felt different. Lighter somehow, like a storm cloud had finally passed. My mom sat on the couch, looking shell-shocked. Salem explained what would happen next. Emergency protective orders, safe housing, counseling services. It was overwhelming, but for the first time, it felt like we had options. Miss Deborah knelt in front of my mom. I'm sorry I didn't see the truth before, she said. But I promise we'll do better this time. My mom nodded, tears still streaming down her face, but they seemed different now. Not tears of fear or pain, but something like relief. That night, we packed essential belongings and went to a safe house. It was a small apartment in a secure building across town. Nothing fancy, just the basics: beds, a kitchen, a tiny living room with a worn couch. But it was the first place I'd ever stayed that didn't have my dad's shadow looming over it. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and court appearances. My dad hired a fancy lawyer who tried to paint me as troubled and my mom as unstable. But the evidence was too strong. The pictures, the recordings, the documented pattern of abuse. It all told a story that couldn't be explained away. Hugo and his parents came to see us at the safe house. When they saw the evidence for themselves, they were horrified. Hugo's dad kept apologizing for not believing me, for letting my dad manipulate them. I didn't blame them. My dad had fooled everyone for years. I knew something was wrong, Hugo said, punching me lightly on the shoulder. Told you my mom would help once she saw proof. His mom, a nurse just like he'd said, had been one of the medical professionals who documented my mom's injuries for the court case. School was weird at first. Rumors spread, as they always do in small towns. Some kids avoided me, not knowing what to say. Others suddenly wanted to be my friend, attracted to the drama. I mostly stuck with Hugo, grateful for the one person who tried to help, even when it was hard. Mrs. Kayla checked on me regularly, sometimes bringing cookies or books she thought I might like. I'm proud of you, she told me one day after class. What you did took incredible courage. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what I had to do. That's what courage is, she replied simply. The court granted my mom full custody and issued a permanent restraining order against my dad. He wasn't allowed within 500 feet of either of us. He eventually pled guilty to reduced charges to avoid a trial, which meant we didn't have to testify in court. Part of me was relieved, but another part wanted the world to hear exactly what he'd done to us. When my dad received his 2-year sentence, I felt conflicted. On one hand, it seemed impossibly short for the years of terror he'd inflicted on us. The prosecutor explained that with the plea deal, he'd likely serve even less time with good behavior, maybe just a year. But on the other hand, knowing he was locked away, even temporarily, gave us breathing room to start healing. The day of his sentencing, I sat in the courtroom and watched him being led away in handcuffs. He didn't look back at us, and I realized that was the first time in my life I'd seen him without any power over me. That night, I cried. Not for him, but for all the years we'd lost. My mom started therapy and joined a support group for domestic violence survivors. Slowly, I watched her change. She stood straighter, spoke louder, started making decisions without looking over her shoulder for approval. She even got a job at a local bookstore, something my dad would never have allowed. I started therapy too. It was awkward at first. I wasn't used to talking about feelings or admitting when things hurt. My therapist, Dr. Natalie, was patient. She explained that recovery wasn't linear, that some days would be harder than others. She was right about that. Some nights I still woke up in a cold sweat, convinced I heard my dad's footsteps on the stairs. Some days I caught myself watching my mom for signs of bruises that weren't there anymore. Old habits died hard. 3 months after we left, my mom and I moved into our own apartment. It was small but bright, with windows that let in actual sunlight. My mom painted the living room yellow, a color my dad would have hated. I got to choose the color for my bedroom, blue, like the sky. We bought secondhand furniture that didn't match and hung pictures on the walls without measuring the exact distances between them. One night, I found my mom sitting on our tiny balcony, looking at the stars. I sat down beside her, and she put her arm around me. "Are you okay?" I asked. It was a question I'd started asking a lot, still half expecting her to hide the truth. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Not completely. Not yet. But I'm getting there." She squeezed my shoulder. "We both are." And she was right. We were getting there, one day at a time. There were still hard days, still moments when the past felt too close. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to come home. For the first time, it actually felt like home. My dad eventually got sentenced to 2 years, though he'd probably get out earlier with good behavior. Sometimes I worried about what would happen when he got out. But my mom reminded me that we were stronger now. We had support, evidence, and most importantly, we had each other. Last week, Hugo came over for a sleepover. We stayed up late playing video games and eating junk food, normal kid stuff. At one point, his mom called to check in, and I heard him tell her everything was fine. Just a regular night at a friend's house. Nothing special. Except it was special to me. Every ordinary moment felt like a miracle after years of walking on eggshells. Every boring, normal day was a victory. I'm 13 now. Sometimes it's hard to believe that just a year ago, I thought abuse was normal. That I thought families were supposed to hurt each other. Now I know different. Now I know what home is supposed to feel like. Safe.